In this video, I want to provide a brief introduction to the organisms found in the fungi kingdom. Fungi have some key characteristics, so there's a great deal of variety. They are eukaryotic cells, so they will have a nucleus. They have cell walls like plants, but their cell walls are made of chitin, which is also a carbohydrate like cellulose, like we find in plant cells, but it's a different carbohydrate. Most fungi are multicellular. We've already talked about the unicellular ones that we typically call yeasts. Most fungi are decomposers, and we're familiar with seeing them in the woods. We have, they're growing on decaying matter out there in nature. But some fungi are pathogens. They cause disease of plants and of animals, including ourselves. And some of them have beneficial symbiotic relationships with plants, that both the plant and the fungi benefit from living and working together. Fungi also reproduce by spores. That's their own particular reproductive method. The cells of a fungi are called hyphae, and they are arranged in thread-like strands or filaments. They basically look like thin tubes, as you can see over here in this microscope image. The hyphae connect together to form a tangled mass called a mycelium, and the mycelium is the main body of the fungus, and we usually don't see that. It's what's hidden underground or under the layer of leaves out in the woods. The reproductive structures, that's the mushrooms or the puffballs that we see visible above the ground. But that's not really the whole fungus. Most of the fungus is the mycelium that is spreading out over a huge area underneath that reproductive structure. Here are some illustrations of hyphae and how they are put together, of course greatly enlarged. They're very, very small. But you have the fruiting body, the mushroom that we see above ground, like we have in the picture, and then there is the mycelium, all the hyphae that really makes up the fungus that is hidden underground, or here we see some just sort of in and out between all of these bits of rotting wood. Hyphae may be distinct cells linked together with cell walls between each individual cell, and then there are pores allowing materials to flow from one cell to the other. Or they may all be joined together sort of as a massive tube with multiple nuclei because the cell walls in between have been taken down. Most of the time fungi are feeding on decomposing material, stuff that's already dead, but occasionally they invade, and so this bottom illustration is showing how the fungal hyphae can actually go into living cells. They can sneak their hyphae through the cell membrane into those cells and then get nutrients directly out of that cell. Here it's a plant cell, but this also happens to animal cells. And so you can imagine how annoying that is to have a fungus feeding off your living cell. Of course, the plant or the animal will have symptoms, their body will react. And then you saw this illustration of the hyphae that act like little nooses or lassos that can trap the nematode worms, these little tiny worms, and actually feed off of something. They're predatory fungus. They can capture something alive and then kill it and get the nutrients. So fungi, their feeding technique is known as external digestion. So they are not taking the particles into themselves like we saw with the protist kingdom, but they're actually putting digestive enzymes into the environment so that we can see here the enzymes are secreted out into the environment, whatever bit of substance, and in the case if this was a hyphae invading a cell, they would be into that cell's cytoplasm, but the enzymes do digestion. They break down larger molecules into smaller molecules so that those things can be absorbed. They're tiny enough to move back through the cell membrane. So after the digestion happens for whatever materials are in the environment, those nutrients are absorbed into the hyphae into feeding the fungus. So this is known as external digestion because it happens outside of the cell. Fungi, as I said, their main role is a decomposer, so they're breaking down dead organic matter, and that's where they're going to get their energy and the nutrients using external digestion. Most fungi are growing most rapidly when it's a moist environment and fairly warm temperatures, but there are a few species that are tolerant of extreme conditions such as high salt or high sugar or very, very dry environments. And fungi can also digest unusual substances such as cloth and paint and plastics and stonework on cathedrals in an article I just read. And so they are busy decomposing everything on Earth. Mold is a term we use for a fast-growing fungus, so it's not a particular fungus. It's just if there's one that's growing fast across the substrate, we label it as a mold. And we see the mold when it has its many fruiting bodies sticking up. So here is a very close-up view of the blackish mold that you see on bread. And we aren't seeing all these individual strands of hyphae with the little sporangium, the little cases that are holding the mold up above there. But we're seeing sort of a fuzzy appearance. Mushrooms, which we're very familiar with as a type of fungus, is actually another fruiting body, another reproductive structure. The second role that fungi play in the ecosystem is in a mutualistic relationship, a symbiotic relationship where you get a benefit for both organisms. The beneficial relationship that we see with fungus, there are actually two, and the first one is the relationship they have with the roots of many species of plants. Fungi that interact with the roots of plants are called mycorrhizae, and they help provide nutrients and help water absorption for the plant. So because they're doing external digestion, they're breaking down substances in the greater environment into very small molecules that the plants can absorb as well as the fungi. So this is giving sort of a fertilizer boost to the plant. And then the type of the way that fungal cells can absorb water also help in transferring water out of the environment and into the plants. The benefit back to the fungi is that the plant provides carbohydrates for the fungus because the plant is making carbohydrates, they're making glucose through photosynthesis. That glucose often is stored in the roots, which is where we're going to find the fungi, and so the fungi then can tap into sort of that extra carbohydrate, that extra glucose. The plant doesn't really need it and can share it with the fungi. So both organisms get something out of this relationship. Here's just an illustration showing all the benefits for a plant that has the mycorrhizal fungal on the roots or associating with it on the roots. And so we get improved water uptake, and it helps with the oxidative stress. This would be substances that happen from metabolism that could cause further damage in the plant. The ions, the charged particles in the plant are kept in better homeostasis. We get better photosynthesis. And just you can see from the picture, this plant looks bigger and healthier, has more leaves, has more roots than the plant that does not have the fungi associated with its roots. Here's just some actual slides on this picture of roots from the western hemlock tree. And so we've got sections of the root where the fungi has gathered around it. You can see sort of these bundles. Here is a microscope close-up, a cross-section of that root. And so all this stuff on the outside is the fungus. In fact, it's not only on the outside, but it also works its way in between cells. It's not damaging the cells in this case. It's just sort of sliding in and living in the same neighborhood. Lichens are a second way that fungi are working in a mutualistic relationship, and in this case their relationship is with algae and a type of photosynthetic bacteria. And so there are actually three different kingdom organisms together: fungi kingdom, protist kingdom, where the algae are coming from, and then the bacteria kingdom. Lichen look like flat leaves, or sometimes they have a couple different colors. They're sort of stiff looking, and they're found on decaying matter, whether you see it on, in this case, it looks like it's on some rocks out in nature, or they also are very commonly seen on dead tree branches. Lichens are able to be used to measure the air quality because they are quite sensitive to pollution, and so if there's too much pollution, they will not flourish. So we can keep track of how our air is doing by looking at the lichens. And then the third category that fungi, the role they occupy in the ecosystem, is as parasites. And so this, in the parasitic relationship, the fungi is benefiting, but whatever living thing it is living off of is not benefiting. It is at least it might be harmed, or maybe to the point that it's actually being killed. So when fungi live on the dead cells on the surface of animals, it is causing a mild irritation, but it's not going to kill that animal. So if you've ever had athlete's foot or ringworm, these are two types of fungi that infect people living on those dead skin cells and also causing some irritation, so you do see redness and itching. Fungi can invade living cells, as I showed you in the previous slide, and then actually destroy part of the organism because as they digest that cell is going to die. A common example of this are plant rust diseases, and they're called rust diseases by the color. So you can see a plant rust affecting this, I'm guessing it's a cedar tree. And then fungi can actually invade living cells and take over an organism to reproduce itself. And we're going to watch a short video on fungi attacking some ants in the rainforest and turning the ants into zombies. So as I mentioned earlier, fungi reproduce by spores. And spores are reproductive cells that grow into hyphae. So spores can be formed directly on the hyphae, as we see over here with a picture of penicillium. Or they can form inside special fruiting structures called sporangia. And so here's an example of some sporangia, and we saw this fungus in the video. This is the one that sort of shoots it off like a gun far away from the cow pats. And then finally, spores can develop in fruiting bodies, and of course mushrooms are probably the most common fruiting body that you think of. We divide the fungi into 3 different phyla, and it's based somewhat on where they put their spores, what the structure is for reproduction, and some other characteristics. And of course, nowadays we can also use DNA to sort things. We have the Zygomicota, which are case-like fungi, and these are ones that put their spores into little sporangium. They're kind of like suitcases on the ends of hyphae. Most of our fruit and bread molds that we see in the kitchen are Zygomicota. There are many soil fungi that are this phylum as well, and some of them are actually parasites of insects. So within each phyla, you have a variety of roles the fungi play in the ecosystem. Then we have the Ascomycota, which are known as the sac-like fungi. Many of our yeast belong to the Ascomycota, but it's not just unicellular fungi. We also have multicellular fungi like these cup fungus that would be Ascomycota. And because, like with the yeast, many of them are useful to humans, so we use a lot of this type of fungi in our food preparation, and some can cause plant disease. So again, all of the categories that fungi, all the roles they occupy in the ecosystem, these different phyla have them all present. Then the last phylum are Basidomicota, which the spore structure is a club-like shape, so they're known as the club-like fungi. And these are our mushrooms and puffballs and bracket fungi that we see out in the woods. Most of your Basidomicota are decomposers, as you're familiar with seeing them. And lastly, fungi, as I'm sure you've already figured out, can be beneficial or harmful to us as humans. We use them to produce drugs like the penicillin that helps fight bacteria. They are involved in producing alcohol, beer and wine, and many, many types of foods, as we've also already mentioned. And then they are used to increase the production of certain vegetables and fruits in agriculture. You can buy packages of the mycorrhizae fungi to go use in your home garden if you're interested in trying to boost the production. But fungi can be harmful because they cause destruction of many things, because they pretty much can decompose anything, and they cause a number of human diseases. Often people react with an allergic reaction to the spores of mold. If you're somebody that suffers from a mold allergy, you know it can be quite annoying. And of course, the toxins produced by poisonous mushrooms, and not so much even the mushrooms that you see out in the woods that you might pick one that would make you sick, but we have the very, very small fungal infections in food cause a type of toxin called as aflatoxin that has been a problem in dog food recently, has led to the death of many pets because the grains that were used to produce the dog food were contaminated with fungus, and that toxin, that poison, was present. So they have their pluses and their minuses, like all of the organisms we find in these different kingdoms. But overall, without fungi, we would not have decomposition to the extent that we do, and our earth would be covered with dead things, and there wouldn't be any room for the live things. This finishes my quick overview of fungus. We'll be doing a variety of labs and activities to continue to learn this material.